Hi, welcome to the Blueprints to Buildings podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Palmer, and on this show, we interview the movers and shakers in the world of property, development, and real estate. Now, before we dive in, though, a quick word. This show is brought to you by a new visual technology that is quietly making waves in the property industry. Now, developers are using it to cut costs, accelerate off-plan sales in ways that sound almost too good to be true. Now, if you're curious, you can message me directly on LinkedIn at Glenn Palmer Online or check out the show notes below. Now, today I am joined by Matthew Young. Now, he is a former London financial markets professional turned property management specialist. Now, he's court appointed building manager and now founder of Syntonia, a venture focused on fixing one of the most overlooked friction points in real estate, managing agent handovers. Matthew, appreciate your time for coming out.
My pleasure.
I know that you've got a busy schedule. Thanks for coming out to chat to me. So yeah, let's kick it off, shall we?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
You're more than welcome, Matthew. So Matthew, first question, right? Ask everybody. If time travel became a reality and you had a chance to go back in time to when you actually first started your career, what advice would the person that you are now actually tell your younger self?
Well, first of all, I'd have to make sure the flux capacitor was working. That's a,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
as everybody knows, it's the flux capacitor that makes time travel possible. Anyway, I'm showing my age, I'm sure. That's a really simple one. I think when you begin your career, you've no idea how the twists and turns it's going to take, or where it's going to take you. But one thing is for sure, and that is at some stage you're going to want to retire. Maybe you don't want to
Yeah.
retire. Maybe you're going to have to retire. And I think the advice that 56-year-old me would give 18-year-old me is save up your pension. I know you can't see it. I know it doesn't sound like a good idea, but that 25 quid a month when you're 18 years old is going to be invaluable when you're 65, 70. So that's the advice I would give.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's
It's
one of
really
the things that
simple.
I didn't do.
Mm,
Is when I was younger, I was jumping from job to job to job, and I just thought, well, I don't need a pension. It's just confusing things going from one to the next to the next.
yeah.
And then eventually, come 30, you're thinking, shit, I really I need to start planning a pension because 20, 30 years down the line, I'm going to be retiring. But
hmm
yeah, you don't think of these things when you're a kid.
No,
But yeah, very solid piece
except
of advice, to be
except
honest, Matthew.
when you're 30.
Um,
So for me, when I was 30, very early in my 30s, I got married, became a dad for the only time, and that changed things again. So and actually midway through my 30s, I finished my career in the city, and that changed things again. So money was very tight when I started my business. I had a mortgage, I had a child. Actually, it was a conscious decision. Pension was not top of the list of priorities, even for 25 quid a week. Although by
mm,
then it probably should have been a couple of hundred. But
yeah,
anybody that said to me, well, you're going to need X, I kind of went, yeah, I'll deal with that soon. And I never did.
yeah, yeah.
Here I am.
So, Matthew, you've been appointed by the UK courts to manage previously sort of unmanageable buildings. So, what
Mhm.
actually makes a building become unmanageable in the first place?
Yeah, there are many reasons. I would say the most common is a breakdown in communication between the two parties, usually a group of leaseholders, although it can be a leaseholder, and the
Hmm.
person who has responsibility for management, usually the freeholder, but it could be a residence management company. In the three cases I've been appointed by the tribunal, the very first one actually my appointment came to an end on the 24th of March. So I'm now just finishing it up. And that was interesting because when you and I first spoke, I was still
Yeah.
6 weeks away from the appointment coming to an end, and it has now ended. But but that came about because the head leaseholder had was absent, and so the leaseholders had nobody managing their property. So that one of the
Mm.
people asked me to make an application on their behalf to have me put in as the manager, and then all of a sudden I was able to take the place of the head leaseholder and make things happen. So, for example, one of the things is when you sell an apartment, you always want to know from the previous owner or the current owner, because you're buying it, things about levels of service charges, major works that are coming, etc., etc., insurance even. And
Yeah.
if the freeholder or the head leaseholder is absent, you've got nobody to ask those questions to. So my appointment meant that all of a sudden they had somebody to ask the questions to. That's on a very simple level. But also, I took over the responsibility of managing, and I appointed a managing agent, which happened to be my own company, and we got things on track. I would say that appointment especially was one of the very few real success stories of what's known as Section 24 legislation, because ultimately the leaseholders purchased the head lease from the official receiver because the head leaseholder had gone bust. And then I handed over management to the leaseholders, which was the best outcome possible. But it took me a very, very long time to find the head leaseholder, and only found him when
Yeah.
I noticed that he had been declared bankrupt. So that was one. And another one was where there was a residence management company named in the lease. So I don't know, let's say it was ABC Towers Limited. ABC Towers Limited was the
Yeah.
only entity that was authorized to collect service charges. Without ABC Towers Limited, nobody could collect service charges. So we were actually appointed by the freeholder, except we weren't. But that, I mean, it doesn't really matter. But what we discovered this anomaly that ABC Towers had been struck off at Company's House. And so technically we were
Right.
demanding service charges which were unenforceable. So we were able to find a leaseholder who we explained the situation to, and we made the application on his behalf, and the application was granted. And then again, I was able to start managing that building properly and start getting works done that hadn't been done for a long time, which was a separate
Yeah.
issue, but that's not the point. And then the
Yeah.
third one was a building where there was just a complete breakdown in communication between the freeholder and the leaseholders. If I look back, I think both parties were probably equally to blame, but there was the added accusation that the freeholder had stolen money, and
Oh, Jesus.
I was able to make an application on their behalf that eventually was approved. It took a good 18, in fact, it took a good 3 years actually. But one of the problems the tribunal asked me to deal with was, can you work out the liability to the leaseholders if the work that was meant to have been done and was paid for in 2006 by the leaseholders, if it had been done, what would be the cost now for the works that need to be done? And it was like putting together a puzzle that you didn't have the four
Yeah.
corners, so you had no starting point. And so eventually I put to the tribunal a proposal, and I just said, look, the works now are going to cost X, let's say £400,000. They've already paid £150,000. So why don't we say the freeholder has to pay £150,000 and the leaseholders have to pay £250,000? And the tribunal liked that, and it worked. Now, I don't know
Yeah.
if the money was ever got from the freeholder, because the freeholder then went bankrupt, but that's a whole other thing.
Mm.
But we did
Yeah.
collect enough money to do the work that needs to be done that hadn't been done for 20 odd years, and we got the
Wow.
building structurally sound and had integrity. It was waterproof and it was sealed and all of that stuff. So
Bloody hell.
different reasons.
Yeah. And some can be quite complex as well when you're
Hmm.
talking about it. So service
Well,
charges are often, sometimes controversial. But from your
yeah.
perspective, what separates a well-structured service charge budget from one that just creates a load of distrust and a load of friction?
Right. Well, this is a really interesting question, because I don't think it's the service charge budget that's important. You see, how does a managing agent know how
Okay.
much to demand from leaseholders? And the way they do that is by putting together a budget. Now, every lease is different. There are some leases that are similar. There might even be leases that are exactly the same, building to building.
Hmm.
Um, but the point of a budget is so the managing agent knows how much to demand. Now, managing agents can't demand £500,000 from all of the leaseholders if they only need 50 grand, but they also can't
Yeah.
demand 50 grand if they're going to need 500,000. And between the two numbers, somewhere is the truth. But this isn't like, well, it's a budget and we can't spend more than that. Sometimes you have to. There are
Yeah.
things like, for example, at the beginning of the year, the cleaner's going to bill you 12 times in the year. They might bill you 500 quid per month. That's 6 grand. You know that. That's easy. What you don't know
Yeah.
is how often you're going to have to call out the lift engineers and what extra
Yeah.
work is going to be done to the lift. So if £100,000, for example, was about the right budget, it could be that you end up spending £110,000. Could be
Yeah.
that you only spend £90,000. So the budget itself is, to a large degree, irrelevant, and there is a
Right.
little bit of a science behind it. You have to assume that costs go up each year. You have to be conservative. So in the case of the lift, if you know your annual lift maintenance is going to cost you £2,000 a year, you have to be, if it's a brand new lift, it's going to be £2,000 a year. But if it's an old lift, it could actually be four, maybe 6,000, maybe even 10,000. And
Yeah.
you have to account for that somehow. You can't not acknowledge that fact at all. Um, and so budgeting is a very difficult thing to do. But people often complain about how much they have to pay per quarter or per month, and that's not actually what service charges are, because the budget is only a contribution. We only ever know what the service charge amount is after it has been certified, usually by an accountant. And the accountant
Yeah.
says the service charges this year were £98,000. That is the service charges. It doesn't matter if you budget 150 grand or 50 grand. If the accountant says it's 98,000, it's
That's what it
98,000.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see that. So you've worked across various new build schemes, where do you think developers most commonly underestimate operational realities once the residents are actually moving in?
Yeah. Well, I think my experience actually is that they're not interested in the operational realities, because
Hmm.
they've built it, they've sold it off plan. Usually, that's the modern way of dealing with it, especially here in the UAE. All they want to do is hand over so they can get all their money out of the buyers and move on to
Yeah.
the next project. My own experience in the UK, the first time I worked with developers managing a brand new built development, I appointed a cleaner to go and clean the common parts. And on her first day, she phoned me and she said, "Matthew, there are no PowerPoints in the common parts." I went, "What?" She actually couldn't plug her Hoover in.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Now, I don't. The two principals were lovely fellas. They were great guys. I really liked them. I got on with them well. And it's the kind of thing that once it's overlooked, it's overlooked.
Yeah.
Um, and it was their first development. They weren't massively experienced, but it's the kind of thing. I'm not saying it happens every time, but I'm sure it does happen.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't the
Yeah.
architect's first gig, and it wasn't the lawyer's first gig. But
Yeah.
the reality of people living in a building is different to what's envisaged at the beginning. So at the beginning, the developer will tell the lawyer what they want in the lease, and the lawyer will put it together. Sometimes it doesn't fit what's actually there. Sometimes the percentages in the lease don't add up to 100%. Sometimes
Right.
they might be short by 5%, they might be over by 5%. And the tribunals have a process of dealing with that. But it goes to show the interest in the operational reality of the new development that developers show, because once they've sold all the apartments, they kind of lose interest.
Yeah. It's done. It's dusted. It's
And I, yeah,
sold.
that's right, and I
Yeah.
understand that as well. But it's seen as, well, that's the facts of life. the managing agent seems to then have to deal with all the snagging difficulties, certainly in the
Yeah.
UK. And that was my experience. Leaseholders would phone me and go, "Oh, my bath is leaking." Well, not my problem. But somehow we
Yeah.
got dragged into that.
Yeah. So what actually happened in the in the end with the plug situation? Did they have to go in and
Right. Yeah.
rewire it all?
I went back to the developers and I said, "Chaps, we got a bit of a problem." They went, "What?" I said, "There's no power in the common parts." And by the way, this wasn't like one tower. This was 7 different buildings
Oh
with a
wow.
total of 57 flats. So
Jesus.
that they authorised the installation of power points,
Yeah.
and that's something I arranged.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was a service. I don't think it was a service charge issue because it
Yeah.
can't be. But and it wasn't massively expensive either. But for example, rather than having the wires neatly chased into the walls to save money, we put trunking up, and I detest
Yeah.
trunking. I just think it's lazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks horrible, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Trunking. So you've
yeah,
spoken
exactly.
about independent snagging. Why
Yeah.
is third-party oversight so critical, and how does it protect both the developer and the buyer?
Well, this is something I really came across when I moved to Dubai, and it really opened my eyes. So people saw snagging as something that's done between the end buyer and the developer, but
Hmm.
actually, whenever the building goes through a stage of transition from, let's say, contractor to developer, and then from developer to end user. A snagging inspection is useful because it's a bit like doing an inventory when you lease a flat. You take a condition report. So that at the end of your year's tenancy or 2 years tenancy, whatever it is, you go back to the landlord, and the landlord says, "Well, you've damaged the kitchen." You say, "Well, that was damaged before I move in," because it's reported. And it's the same with a snagging report. The only difference being is that you won't complete on the purchase until you've had the defects remedied. But that's why
Yeah.
it's useful, so that you can know that you're getting what you paid for, and that's whether you're a developer taking over from the contractor, because contractors like to cut corners, and
Yeah.
and also if you're an end user buying an apartment, so that you know that the developer has done their snagging properly, so that you're getting what you pay for or what you paid
Hmm.
for.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's why it's
So
important.
let's talk about your new business, Syntonia. So
Hmm.
why are managing agent handovers so chaotic? What's fundamentally broken in the current process, and what did you see Syntonia fixing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, what where to start? I think when anybody loses business, there is always a disappointment. If I lose business to you, I wouldn't say I'm going to be hostile to you, but I'm not going to be happy that you've nicked bit. That's how we see it, is that you've nicked
Yeah.
business. You may have won it fair and square. I may not have done my job properly. And for me, I have to hold my hands up and go, "Well, we didn't, I didn't do what I was meant to do, and so I've lost the business." But not everybody
Hmm.
sees it that way. So the minute that I lose an instruction and I lose it to you, that puts a barrier between us, if you like, right? Even if we're
Yeah.
mates, right? And it's just there because there's a disappointment. So you may have predicated your business plan on the basis that you're going to get in £50,000 worth of management fees that I've now just lost to you.
Hmm.
Um, and the problem that I see, and I know this from having been a managing agent, is that uh, the minute you lose the instruction, the building or the development just stops being important. Um, and really, all you have to do is make sure that on your last day, you've got all the documents ready to go to the new agent. In fact, that's what we used to do. Was we would use the time. We knew we had 3 months notice. We would then get all the documents back from archive. We would check them. We'd box them all up. Sometimes we'd have the boxes sitting in our office for 2 or 3 weeks. And then on the very last day, or maybe the day after, we would send those boxes to the new managing agent, probably having already given them some information. But 8 years ago, before I left my business, handovers didn't seem to be the same problem that they are today. And from people I speak to and things I see on social media, it is becoming a real problem in a way that it wasn't before. And this could be because there are more leaseholders than ever before. So
Yeah.
there's more people shouting about it. And also there are more managing agents, I think, than ever before. So there's definitely more people shouting about it. But I think the way we look at handovers needs a complete overhaul. For example, when I, as a managing agent, when I receive notice that I'm losing the instruction, if I were the client, I wouldn't want me managing it another day. Now, I have to from a practical point of view, but I think there has to be an agreement, whether it's tacit or even written, that I'm going to do it on a care and maintenance basis. I'm just not going to put any more effort into that building. It's going
Yeah.
to crystallize some of the problems that I haven't yet dealt with. They're going to come to the fore, unfortunately, and I've got to deal with those or put a plan in place. But I think the handover should start the minute you get disinstructed, and at some stage in the handover period, the new agent can actually start doing things, and
Right.
it just needs greater cooperation between the two parties. There's always a problem with reconciling monies and transferring funds, which is always a function of the current managing agent or now former managing agent hasn't done their job properly, which is probably why they're losing the gig. And it's tidying up all these things. So I had this epiphany, if you like, that if I could draw the hostility, whether real or imagined, from the two individual companies and have them both pointing at me, that actually could help the the handover process better so that the clients benefit. So this isn't about, well, you've lost the management, so you must be bad, and the new managing agent
Mm.
must be good because they've won it. This is about providing a service to both sides of the equation for the good of their client so that it gets done and dusted quickly, efficiently, and fully. Even if it's not done fully in 3 months, if you know after 3 months what's still outstanding, you know you've got somebody monitoring it and looking at it and chasing it up. I think that's a
Yeah.
benefit to everybody. There's just no
Yeah.
point, there's no value in holding up handovers, and I don't actually believe that people um, hold them up on purpose. But I think it's a function of our industry that they're notoriously difficult. People don't quite know what to do. Um, and I was hoping, and it's still my intention, to provide a service to both sides of the equation.
Yeah. So it's sort of like you're going to be the middleman that
Yeah.
will have a look at what is the to-do list of the outgoing, the to-do list of the incoming, and
Mhm.
sort of bring it all together.
Yeah, and
Nice.
and 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 tick the boxes as things happen. Have both sides
Yeah.
uh, report to me. Both sides ask questions. It's very important that an incoming managing agent has the ability to ask questions. So I've set up this system. It's basically a virtual data room where the outgoing agent dumps all the data. I get it into some semblance of order. And only when I've done that, I give access to the incoming agent who can then look at it and they can ask me questions. I will ask those questions of the outgoing agent. They will respond. Um, and one of the things that this process relies on is both parties engaging. It's all very well the incoming agent engages; they're the easy one, but the outgoing managing agent has to engage. And as part of that, I think it's important to. Well, one of my ideas was to issue a completion certificate at the end, so that the outgoing managing agent actually had a bit of paper that said you have completed the handover, as would
Yeah.
the incoming managing agent. It sounds a little trite, and you might say, if you were cynical, well, what's the point of that? But I think it's really important that people are known for the quality of their handovers, especially once we've been going a little while and we've got a bit of data to measure against.
Yeah.
It actually could be something that managing agents sell themselves on, is we are known for being good to hand over when it's time to hand over, because it's a bit of a merry-go-round out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say it's day one at Syntonia. There's no glossy
Mhm.
branding, there's just your experience and there's that structure.
Yeah.
that you've created. What does best in class handover look like in 3 to 5 years from now, then?
Best in class looks like a steady flow of handovers. I want Syntonia to be known as the go-to company to handle handovers. There are
Yeah,
many companies that specialize in different aspects of property management or residential block management. This is, I believe, something that's not been done in the residential world. It is done in the commercial property management world, but not residential. Um, I want to be the first port of call when somebody when somebody wins an instruction. The first port of call is, Matt, we've got another one. Uh, this is the building. This is the outgoing agent. Will you handle it for us? Yes, I will. And then we go from there.
yeah. Well,
And I've
excellent.
got a team
Well,
doing that.
Matthew, it's been great having you on the show.
It's
Really
good
enjoyed
being
our
here.
conversation. And just knowing how important function facility management actually is, and that often gets overlooked.
Mm,
Once everything gets handed over.
mm.
Once again, thanks to my listeners and viewers of YouTube as well. Matthew, before we go, if listeners and viewers want to get hold of you, get in contact with you, learn about Syntonia, how can they do that?
I've got an email address for Syntonia. I also run a property managing agency because I manage one building. I can give you my
Hmm.
email addresses uh, and
Yeah.
Instagram stuff, although Instagram's not really, I don't use it as a business tool, but you can reach me that way.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you
And
want me to say them
I'll
out loud now or you're
yeah,
going to put them in the
say them
link.
out loud and then I'll
So,
put them
so
in the link
great.
anyway.
So the best email for me at the moment is matthew.young@hatchfordpm.co.uk. I've also got matthew.young@syntonia.co.uk, but the Hatchford one
Hmm.
is better because I've tested it.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
my Instagram is Rusty Sword 24, which is a moniker I got from a great uncle who was killed in the First World War, who was
Oh wow.
disciplined for having a rusty sword,
Okay.
a rusty bayonet, hence
Bayonet,
hence
yeah.
Rusty Sword.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I'll put them in the comments as well. So,
Excellent.
quick reminder to everybody, this episode was supported by PropTech Visual Platform that is changing how forward-thinking developers plan, pitch, and sell. Now, it isn't mainstream yet, but it will be. Now, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, you know exactly where to find me. You've been listening to Blueprints to Buildings. I'm your host, Glenn Palmer, and today I was joined by Matthew Young. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.